Hello, testing. Dr. Ray here. We're getting started. I'm just doing like a little sound check as I get started here to make sure everything is working. Let's see. Hold on. Dr. Ray. Yep, everything's working. We're good. Okay, so today we're going to talk about, so for one of my live sessions, I had an interesting meeting yesterday that I'm going to talk a little bit about. Talk about some of the things we learned. You know, we're back to this topic, the teacher to instructional designer, or really just novice to instructional designer. So I was at a meeting yesterday. So first of all, just background, this is like a hot topic in the field. I am doing a research study right now on this topic. Research study with Carl Kopp and Jessica Briskin. They are both professors at Bloomsburg. I'm a professor at UNCW. So we're doing this study on this exact topic to compare the difference of how novice versus expert instructional designers solve problems. So we're conducting it in the spring. But anyhow, I had a meeting yesterday, and I'm not going to go into the details about the meeting, like who was there and stuff like that, because it was a meeting, and you know, I don't need to identify people. But there was people from FAANG companies, like, you know, FAANG, if you're not familiar, that's Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, Google. There were people from those companies there, hiring managers in instructional design. There were hiring managers from high levels in government agencies and government contracting firms. There were people who owned instructional design companies, both large and small. There were people there in healthcare who have or hire instructional designers. So it was a good group of people. And basically what we were talking about wasn't the field in general. Now, there were lots of conversations happening and stuff, but I'm just going to point to some of the things that came up that I specifically, you know, asked them about, just because I had some of their attention for a little bit of the time. So I was able to, you know, kind of ask them about a few things about like who they want to hire, what they look for in a resume and stuff like that, because I thought it was really fascinating. So first of all, I go on Reddit a lot, and one of the biggest things I see there, especially being pushed by the, I guess it's instructional design like academies, is that in order to become an instructional designer, you know, I have a lot of people like, hey, I'm a teacher and I want to be an instructional designer. Hey, I want to get into instructional design. How do I do it? And pretty much every person on there says, get Articulate or Captivate, develop some some sample work, and start applying to jobs. So I talked about that with all of these people. I basically was asking them, you know, how do you hire and what do you look for and stuff like that? And basically all of them said, and pretty much agreed on a very similar thing. They said, when hiring people, we all look for, there are three things that they have to include. One is their resume. So does the person have like meet our qualifications? How does this person interview? And then we have to see some work samples. So those were the three components. Now, when I see this on Reddit, the only component I ever see people focusing on is that portfolio piece. Now, let me talk about some of the issues and things that these people brought up. So I kind of asked them, you know, so how important is that portfolio? How do you, you know, how do you rank it in terms of importance? And they said, honestly, we just need to see some work samples. The portfolio is not that important. And they said, here is why. They said, anyone can develop pretty work, teach themselves with this piece of software to develop something nice. They said, the problem is, that's great at like a junior level job that's never going to go anywhere. They said, or if they just need someone to develop, like they're giving them all the design work and someone's just going to develop something, they're like, that's great. They're like, the problem is when we hire people, we expect them to stay at our company and grow and be promoted and do good things like after that. And they said, what happens is is that if you hire someone that doesn't have the full ID background, they said you run into lots of problems when this person's going to grow. They said they've tried it a couple times each and ran into really bad experiences and now really don't look for that anymore. They're basically looking people who have been trained in instructional design before applying to the job. It was kind of a pretty common theme. They were pretty dead set and adamant about that. That without that full understanding of what ID is, how to really develop training, what goes into it, and how do you develop that, you can't really grow within their companies. And I thought it was really fascinating and something that's not hit on whatsoever in the Reddit forums that I see. And I think I've always said, it's a very strange phenomenon that instructional designers don't claim that they need to be trained in instructional design. But, when I talk to these companies, and these were companies from every sector and big ones, and they were all saying the exact same thing. When we look at a resume, we need to see that the person can do more than just develop a portfolio. They're like, that's the least important aspect of the job. They were like, that's a junior level thing that we expect someone to be able to do. They're like, I'm looking at the person long term, like, where is this person going to be in 2 or 3 years? And that development is not going to be helpful. They need to understand basics of project management, communication, instructional design, things we're not teaching them on the job. So those were the things that I saw. It was really, 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 really interesting. And it was an interesting conversation and kind of a wake-up call. I actually felt like good. I was like, wow, so these people agree with everything that I've been saying for years. Because then I don't feel like, that there's something wrong with my thought process. It's nice to have other people, professionals out there in the field, agreeing with what you're having to say, and to hear from them, especially like when it's all these big companies. I see a lot of this stuff on Reddit, and it's really interesting because I don't think it's correct. There's a lot of misinformation out there about what people need to do to get into instructional design. And I really think that, it's really good for people to take their time and do their research before they're going to do it and get into the field. So it was just a fascinating conversation. I learned a lot. It's always good to, obviously I have a consulting firm, so I'm in corporate all the time dealing with clients, but I don't always talk to other companies. I do when I'm getting students hired and stuff like that, because that's part of my job, but like I'm not just like talking to them about the field all the time. So especially with like a bunch of them to bounce ideas off each other. But it was one of the big things. They basically said, that portfolio is nice, but like the resume and what they've done, like their qualifications are important. And like I don't see that ever stressed in those Reddit forums. I see the portfolio stressed and not the actual stuff that they've done in their past, their resume, and how they know instructional design, like what experience do they have, where did they learn it, like that needs to be part of your resume too. So anyway, this was short, quick, sweet, but I just wanted to kind of talk about that, reflect on it a little bit, because I just thought it was fascinating and something that I think that, thinking about going into instructional design, if you want a longevity in this career, you need to think about what companies are looking for and what they want and what they expect out of their potential employees. So, you got to make sure you have that resume. That portfolio is something they are going to look at, but it's, from the way it sounded yesterday during this meeting, it was very hardly important whatsoever. They were pretty adamant that anyone can develop a nice portfolio, and it's a very junior level task that they don't really care about. Because they said, we're looking for people that we're hiring that can do many other things besides develop a pretty piece of training. They're like, that's a very junior level, low level task. They're like, we expect our employees to be able to grow, get promoted, work do well, and they're like, that's not what we're looking for. When we're if we were just looking for a pretty portfolio, they're like, we would be hiring graphic designers. So it was really fascinating to hear that coming from everyone, and everyone in agreement from all these different industries and companies. I almost wish that that conversation with all their companies listed and everything was like published on the web, because I think every person trying to go into ID needed to see and hear what these companies were saying. Because when you're on these like forums like Reddit and stuff, you're talking to a lot of really random people who are anonymous and can say anything they want to. There's also a lot of people out there trying to make money from these people too, that are trying to break into ID. There's a lot of people trying to make money off them. So there's a lot of that. So you guys got to be careful and do your research, and make sure you talk to a bunch